embarrassment on more than one occasion. My client, Arnold Anderson, has suffered personal and professional humiliation and seeks a divorce on the grounds of insanity. We request the family home valued at $325,000, 75% of the family tax preparation business valued at $500,000, and a portion of the Mercedes valued at $60,000. Thank you.
Mr. Rutkin, do you want to reserve your opening statement or make it now?
I'd like to make it now, Your Honor. The only insanity in this case is the sheer madness of Arnold Anderson. He is a monster, viciously preying on his wife's delicate nature while engaging in an adulterous affair with his wife's sister, and all of this in a quest for his wife's money. Mrs. Anderson seeks a divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty, physical cruelty, and adultery. She asks that you award her all of the family assets, since they were primarily all of hers prior to the marriage, either through inheritance or her earnings. Thank you.
Mr. Krause, call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. I called Arnold Anderson to the stand, please.
Mr. Anderson, step forward, please.
About to testify is Arnold Anderson, vice president of the Talmadge Corporation, a tax consulting firm founded by his wife's father. Mrs. Anderson claims he's become violent with her, forcing her to submit to unwarranted psychiatric treatment in order to gain control of the business.
All right, let me hear from the plaintiff.
Thank you. Arnold, your future father-in-law introduced you to your wife, didn't he?
Yes, we were very happy. Until 2 years ago, when Mitzi's father died. Well, she became moody and very depressed. She'd stay in bed for days at a time, not eating and crying all the time. And then I found out Mitzi had seen a psychiatrist, a Dr. Felix Jakobson. And then Mitzi confessed she'd been diagnosed as a severe manic depressive.
Did you seek help for your wife?
Oh, immediately. She was put back into Dr. Jakobson's care, and she got better for a brief period of time. But soon after, she began to have these violent mood swings. Once she'd been depressed for weeks, and when I came home, she was all excited. She spent $10,000 in new living room furniture.
Did you find that purchase upsetting?
No. What upset me was to come home 2 days later to find the furniture splattered with green enamel paint. Oh, Mitzi admitted doing it, but she couldn't remember when. And then she started screaming, and she took out a knife, and she slashed the leather sofa cushions to ribbons.
Were there other incidents of her uncontrolled behavior?
Oh, yes. I found her in my office at home one evening, tossing a lighted book of matches into my files. When I finally got her under control, 2 years' worth of client tax records are burned. And then weeks later, she ran to the street naked, screaming I was having an affair with Kathy, her sister. Our neighbors got an eyeful that day.
Could she ever give any reason for her actions?
Now, you see, that's the worst part. She could never even remember them. And then she wouldn't let me in bed with her. Even if I touched her, she'd scream, "No, no, you're burning me. My skin is peeling off." And then she'd hit and scratch until I left the room.
Did she ever harm herself?
Oh, yes. I had to watch her constantly. One evening, I was awakened by the sounds of gunfire. I ran downstairs to the dining room, and there was Mitzi with a shotgun shooting the room apart. And then she aimed the gun at me, and I dove under the table. Then she yelled, "I'd be better off dead." And then I heard the gun go off. Thank God she hadn't shot herself.
Is that when you made the decision to place her in the Peaceful Haven mental health facility?
Actually, we decided together. It was after that episode that Mitzi recognized she was desperately sick, and Dr. Jakobson confirmed the fact, so I signed the commitment papers. But before we could take her to the hospital, she ran away. It was days before I found her at Dr. Hugo Morrison's house.
What was she doing there?
She was living with him. And she said I should just leave her in peace, and Morrison kicked me out the door. I love Mitzi, but she's totally under Hugo Morrison's control. He's supposedly treating her, but all he's done is turn her against me, and he's squeezing every penny out of her inheritance that he can get.
Objection. Speculation, Your Honor.
Hey, look, you can object your chief.
Now, just a minute. I run the courtroom. The objection sustained. Ask your next question.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Anderson, didn't your wife tell you that the green paint had been spilled by the painters who were redoing the living room walls?
No, that's what she said. But the painters didn't slash the furniture. I saw Mitzi do that.
Weren't the tax records which burned the very same records which the IRS was seeking from you in a lawsuit against you?
Well, yes, but that's why I had them at home. I was sorting the records that the IRS wanted when Mitzi burned them.
But didn't you burn those records yourself using the alibi of your wife's insanity?
Oh,
Your Honor, objection. He's asking my client to incriminate himself.
The objection sustained. Ask your next question.
Suicide threats are rather serious. Why didn't you take her to see Dr. Morrison for treatment as she requested?
Because Dr. Jakobson was her doctor, and he understood the seriousness of her illness.
Didn't Mrs. Anderson catch you and Kathy Talmadge making love in the records room at the Talmadge Company?
Certainly not. Mitzi invented an affair between Kathy and me out of her own delusions. There was nothing going on between us.
And is it also one of her delusions that she overheard you and Kathy discussing a plot to commit her so that you could take Mitzi's inheritance and give it to Kathy?
No, that is a paranoid hallucination. I can't believe you're asking this.
Well, believe it. Didn't Mitzi flee in terror from Dr. Jacobson's office when you told her, quote, Once I get you in Peaceful Haven, Kathy and I can be together and spend your money.
No. I told her Kathy and I would spend whatever money it took for her to get better.
Nothing further.
I want to see counsel on the bench, please. You may step down, Mr. Anderson.
While Arnold Anderson leaves the stand, we have time for a break.
What's the easiest way to top a taco with Velveeta? Try new Velveeta Shreds. Finally, easy-to-use shreds of the great Velveeta taste no other shreds can match. That's new Velveeta Shreds, original or Mexican.
Crunch and Munch is love at first bite. You're gonna love it with all of your might. You better keep your Crunch and Munch in sight.
Crunch and Munch, popcorn and peanuts covered with rich, buttery toffee.
Crunch and Munch is love at first bite.
I've been asked to try something new at my laundry. Calgon water softener. Let's see what happened.
I'm shocked. They look brighter, they look whiter, they look cleaner. There's a difference. These are a lot whiter.
Calgon water softener for the cleanest wash and the hardest water.
Oh, look. After 20 years, Michael loves Sarah.
You haven't changed.
I take care of myself.
And she takes Geritol Complete with nearly twice the iron of ordinary supplements.
Marry me? Again?
Geritol Complete for the best years of your life.
Here in Los Angeles, we've got some big flea problems. We've also got a big solution. The Holiday Fogger. Holiday is a leading fogger where fleas and roaches are really tough. It has fumigating action that seeks out and kills fleas. No matter how big your problem, Holiday, a major cause of death among bugs.
I was in a head-on collision, 6 months pregnant. Larry H. Parker helped me get $100,000, which I wasn't expecting.
I was in a car accident, and I received a settlement.
Counsel at the bench.
Mr. Rudkin?
Your Honor, Dr. Jakobson's testimony would violate doctor-patient confidentiality.
Your Honor, there is no confidentiality in this case. He has made his client's emotional condition a claim for defense, and he's charged that my client's necessary hospitalization of his wife constituted mental cruelty.
But we only had to make that claim because of the plaintiff's outrageous accusations and behavior. My client was wrongfully committed against her will.
Considering the allegations contained in your cross-complaint, the objection is overruled. The doctor may testify. Dr. Jacobson, step forward, please.
Dr. Jakobson, Mitzi Anderson, psychiatrist, has been called to testify after discussion with the attorneys and Judge Keene. He's been treating her depression, which intensified with the death of her father, the wealthy industrialist Morton Talmadge.
All right, let me hear from the doctor.
Doctor, could you please state your medical background and experience for the court?
Yes, I have a PhD in psychology from Redstone University and then an MD from State College of Medicine.
And how long have you treated Mrs. Anderson?
The poor child first came to me at her father's request when she was 14. Now, Mitzi was a slow learner, but that did not explain many of the problems that she had. So I gave her extensive tests and examinations and diagnosed her as a manic depressive, and she has been on lithium for many years since then. But if the disorder becomes terribly severe, as Mitzi's did, nothing helps. Commitment is usually the only solution.
And what made you realize Mrs. Anderson's condition had worsened?
Arnold had given Mitzi a birthday party, which I attended, and everything was fine until it was time to cut the cake out by the pool. Mitzi became entranced by the burning candles and suddenly tossed the cake into the pool. Then she took the knife and went after Arnold. Luckily, she only nicked him in the arm before we were able to subdue her.
Doctor, would you please describe what happened the day Mrs. Anderson fled your office?
Mr. Anderson was frantic, completely exhausted with trying to deal with her. And after I calmed Mitzi, she admitted she had tried to kill herself and agreed to being put into the clinic.
You liar! I didn't even know what was happening.
Mrs. Anderson, be seated. Be seated.
It is all right, sir, that I'm used to these paranoid outbursts. Many manic depressives have them.
Well, doctor, I am not. Now go ahead and finish your answer.
Yes, sir. Well, as I was beginning to complete the commitment papers, Mitzi began pulling at her hair and moaning that she would be better off dead. Then as poor Mr. Anderson finished signing the papers, she attacked him and scratching at his face with a fingernail, screaming, "I'll kill you, I'll kill you." Then she threw a chair through a window, jumped out, and was gone. Mr. Anderson went running after her.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Isn't it true that you increased Mrs. Anderson's medication to 30 milligrams every 4 hours?
That is correct. I increased it about a year ago when I realized the old dosage stopped being effective.
And isn't it true that such a large amount of that medication can in and of itself cause manic and erratic behavior?
Yes, if it is not carefully monitored, but I was watching Mitzi very closely.
But isn't it a fact that Mr. Anderson paid you triple your normal rates to ensure that you kept his wife heavily drugged?
Certainly not. How dare you try to discredit my professional ethics?
But isn't it true that the same week you increased her medication, Mr. Anderson presented you with 1,000 shares of Talmadge Company stock?
He gave me those shares because he was short of cash. It was not a bribe, if that is what you're trying to imply, sir.
I don't need to. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Doctor, you may step down. Anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
Let me hear from the defense.
I call Mitzi Anderson to the stand.
Taking the stand is Mitzi Anderson, the defendant in this case, who is being sued for divorce by her husband on grounds of insanity. He claims her increasingly manic and violent behavior forced him to commit her to a mental clinic.
All right, let me hear from Mrs. Anderson.
Mrs. Anderson, what attracted you to your husband?
Well, he was so nice to me. People call me stupid because I'm slow, but Arnold treated me like a normal person. We laughed a lot, and he was so patient.
When did your husband's attitude toward you change?
Well, when my daddy died, he left me a huge trust fund, and just 2 days after Daddy's funeral, Arnold would yell at me to stop moping around. I can't stand all this crying.
Did he do anything to help you?
Yes, he gave me some pills from Dr. Jakobson and was nice to me again, so I felt better. Then strange things happened that scared me. Like I put a necklace out to wear before taking my bath, and when I came out, it would be gone, and it would show up 2 days later or whatever in exactly the place I'd put it originally. And one time I woke up in Arnold's office with the file cabinet burning, and I didn't know how I got there. That really scared me.
What did your husband do when you told him about these occurrences?
He gave me some more pills and said if I didn't stop, he would have me locked away. Well, I got scared, and I called Dr. Jakobson, but he was gone, so I asked for Dr. Morrison. The nurse said he didn't work there anymore, but she gave me his address. When I went to see Dr. Morrison, he took me off all my pills, so I felt lots better. But I figured it'd be better if I didn't tell Arnold I wasn't taking them.
Did you then discover your husband in an adulterous relationship?
Oh, yes. One night, Arnold was working very late at the Talmadge Company, so I packed a dinner and went over there to surprise him. I'm the one that got the surprise. Arnold and my sister Kathy were on top of his desk making love like a couple of dogs. When they saw me, something awful happened.
What happened, Mrs. Anderson?
Well, they grabbed me, drove me home, and tied me up in my bedroom. I begged Arnold to let me go, but he just laughed. I asked him why he loved my sister Kathy and not me, and he said, Kathy's got the looks, you've got the money, and we're going to fix that.
Oh, absolutely not. That's
All right. Be seated, Mr. Anderson. Now, let's continue with this witness.
Did your husband make any other threats at the time?
Yes, he said he'd had it with me and that he was going to have me put away for the rest of my life and that Kathy would take over the trust fund that should have been hers. I should have been smart then, but I made a mistake. I said only dangerous people were put in hospitals forever, and I wasn't dangerous. And Arnold said he and Kathy would fix it so people would believe I was.
And how did he arrange that?
Well, the next morning he forced me to take lots of pills. And later I heard Arnold and Kathy laughing and loud gunshots from the dining room. Then Arnold took me to Dr. Jakobson's and told him I'd shot up the house. I couldn't think straight. I was so dizzy and afraid. Arnold told me then that I would never leave the mental hospital.
How did you manage to escape from Dr. Jakobson's office?
I got hysterical and started fighting for my life. I bit and kicked and scratched Arnold, and Dr. Jakobson came at me with a big needle, but I took a chair and threw it at the window and broke it. I jumped out and ran all the way to Dr. Morrison's office. It was all so scary and awful. Dr. Morrison, thank heaven, he saved me.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Come on, Mrs. Anderson. Instead of making love, weren't your husband and your sister just trying to finish some tax returns before the April 15th deadline?
I may be slow, but I know the difference between sitting behind a desk and lying on each other, one on top of the other.
Didn't you wake up in your dining room covered in broken glass with a shotgun in your hand once?
No, Arnold told Dr. Jakobson that's what happened, but it didn't. I've never even held a gun.
Oh, really? Well, Your Honor, I have here a bill of sale which has already been marked in plaintiff's exhibit number 1, which is for the sale of a double-barreled shotgun. Now, do you deny it's made out to you, Mrs. Mitzi Anderson?
Well, yes, that's my name. But I bought it with my daddy because he wanted to teach me how to shoot ducks. But I was afraid, so I've never even used it.
Didn't you tell Dr. Jakobson you needed to be put in a clinic because you wanted to kill yourself? Isn't that true?
No. He told Dr. Jakobson that's what happened, but I just kept the gun by my bed to protect myself.
By your bed? I thought you never touched the shotgun.
Well, I didn't. I mean, at least I don't remember.
Didn't you regularly beg your husband to give you extra tranquilizers, saying you felt nervous all the time?
No, I hate taking pills. Dr. Morrison got me off all that stuff. He saved me.
He saved you. Didn't he just tell you that if you signed your entire trust fund over to him, he'll make sure you never got committed again?
No, Dr. Morrison never asked me for anything. He's my friend.
And you don't need any enemies, I can see. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, you may step down. Let me see counsel. Again at the bench, please.
While Mitzi Anderson leaves the stand, we have time for a short break.
Medieval times.
First court, about to testify in behalf of Mitzi Anderson, is Dr. Hugo Morrison, a psychiatrist and former assistant to Dr. Jakobson.
All right, let's continue.
Dr. Morrison, please tell the court your medical background and experience.
Your Honor, there's no need for that. We stipulate to his medical qualifications.
I accept the stipulation. Go ahead.
Okay. Did you disagree with Dr. Jakobson's treatment of Mrs. Anderson?
Yes. I felt that Dr. Jakobson's prescribing lithium for Mrs. Anderson was totally the wrong treatment. I mean, that medication, when given to someone who does not have the chemical imbalance that's associated with manic depressives, can be very, very dangerous, causing quite bizarre behavior and illness.
Did you ever speak to Mr. Anderson about your concerns?
I tried to. I went to the Anderson home one day, and I found Mitzi very heavily sedated and confused. And then Mr. Anderson came home, and he was very angry, and he forced me to leave.
Were there repercussions from your visit?
Yes, a few days later, Dr. Jakobson called me and told me that he had received a call to him about me from Mr. Anderson. And then Jakobson asked for my resignation from the clinic, and I gave it to him, stating that I did not want to be a party to medically unsound practices.
When did you next encounter Mr. Anderson?
After his wife came to me from Dr. Jakobson's office, she was so hysterical that I agreed to let her stay at my home while I got her down from the drugs, and I could ascertain what had actually happened. And then I went to the Anderson home to confront Mr. Anderson. Well, the maid told me that he was out in the garden, so I went there, and I discovered him and another woman making love on a chaise lounge by the pool.
And who was that woman?
Kathy Talmadge, Mitzi's sister.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Dr. Morrison, since you resigned from Dr. Jakobson's clinic, haven't you been instrumental in bringing 4 malpractice suits against him?
I have been active with those judgments against him because I believe Dr. Jakobson practices bad medicine.
Bad medicine. Well, isn't it a fact, Doctor, that Mrs. Anderson has recently funded the Morrison Mental Health Clinic, which you, surprisingly, are chairman of?
Yes, but Mrs. Anderson simply took advantage of a good tax deduction when she saw one.
Speaking of taking advantage, isn't it true that Mrs. Anderson is living with you?
No, she's staying in my guest house. I just didn't want to let her go back in that bad situation.
Doctor, is it ethical for a psychiatrist to live with one of his patients?
I told you, we're not living together. She's living in my guest house.
I'm sure she is. No further questions, Your Honor.
Now, counsel, I want your remarks, but I want them at the time of closing argument and not before. Doctor, you may step down.
Thank you.
Anything further from the defendant?
Defense rests, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Krause, I'll hear your comments.
Thank you. Your Honor, one doesn't have to be Sherlock Holmes to make the standard deduction that Mrs. Anderson's ludicrous charges of adultery and physical cruelty have been the product of a very, very confused mind. In tax terms, she is filing short on this marriage. Mr. Anderson has tried everything to make his marriage work, but he can no longer afford to be abused personally and professionally. We seek a divorce on the grounds of insanity, as well as the marital assets we mentioned before. Thank you.
Mr. Rotkin.
Your Honor, they say the best defense is a good offense. Well, Mr. Anderson's conduct here has certainly been offensive. First, he hires a doctor to keep his wife heavily drugged. Then, he takes advantage of her condition by tormenting her physically and emotionally. And finally, he has an affair with his wife's sister. And all of this ultimately in his greed for his wife's money. This court should send a clear message to the Arnold Andersons of the world that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. This court should grant a divorce to Mitzi Anderson on the grounds of mental cruelty, physical cruelty, and adultery. And all of the family assets should be awarded to her, since they were primarily all hers prior to the marriage through inheritance or through her own earnings. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel.
While Judge Keene reviews the conflicting testimony in this rather bizarre case in order to reach his decision, we have time to take a short break.
Ask these messages. That car hit me when I slammed on my brakes. I guess I don't have any rights, but this pain.
You do have rights. Call 1-800-THE-LAW, too.
I hurt my back in that accident, but what can I do? I was a passenger.
Passengers have the same rights as drivers. Call 1-800-THE-LAW, too. On behalf of the legal rights defenders, Robert Standard has dedicated his practice to accident victims. If you have any questions about an accident, ask the experts. Call 1-800-THE-LAW, too.
Pass the thick and chunky. Taste the old Southwest. Pass the thick and chunky. Old El Paso's best.
America's newest pastime is passing the old El Paso thick and chunky salsa. It's all natural and deliciously fresh tasting. So pass the thick and chunky for more fun and flavor in all your favorite foods.
Pass the thick and chunky. Old El Paso's best.
We return now to divorce court where Judge Keene is about to render his decision.
The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. That, of course, is paradise lost. But that thought crossed my mind as I listened to the strange details of the Anderson marriage. For what if someone else induces the human mind to make its own hell, a hell of marriage? I have no difficulty in resolving the question of whether or not this marriage should be dissolved or not. For after 4 years, it is obviously void of any legitimate object of matrimony. And I will order a judgment of divorce entered in this courtroom today. The more complex question, of course, is what are the factors that brought us all together here today in this courtroom? Aside from the parties who have testified, I have listened to the opinions of 2 doctors who obviously have differences that are both professional and personal. However, I believe the testimony of Dr. Morrison. I'm satisfied that this was a deliberate attempt by Mr. Anderson to use the fragile state of his wife's mind to his own devious ends. Insofar as Dr. Jakobson's part in this, I'll simply attribute that to sheer incompetence. Had it not been for Dr. Morrison, I'm satisfied that Mr. Anderson might well have gotten away with his plan. I will therefore order that the judgment of divorce in this case be entered for Mrs. Anderson on her cross-complaint on the grounds of mental, physical cruelty, and adultery. Now, as to the property involved, $885,000, I will confirm the fact that $600,000 of that, including the family home, is the separate property of Mrs. Anderson. As to the balance, that is the true marital estate, I will order a division of 10%, 90% in favor of Mrs. Anderson, because I can't recall a case of greater mental and physical cruelty than this one. This court stands in recess.
Divorce Court is a dramatization based on cases and issues raised in the family courts of this nation. None of the participants knows the outcome of the case before hearing Judge Keene's decision. The jurisdiction is a combination of laws of all 50 states, therefore the laws of your community may differ. The cases are argued by attorneys and presided over by Judge William Keene, who served on the Superior Court of California for 18 years.
It's a beautiful life when you love what you do. When you